Thank you all for coming to glyneisha's Artist Talk, along with our TMS cohort that we have over here. My name is Brandon Barr. I'm the Teen Adult Programs Manager here at CAM, and I kind of help oversee the Teen Museum Studies program. So what we're going to do today, we're going to have glyneisha's going to give a presentation on her artwork and her practice. Then we're going to hand it over. The Teen Museum Studies students, which consist of Frankie Williams, Aidan Thompson, and Gray Baker, are going to give a little Q&A with glyneisha. I'm not sure where the feedback's coming from, but there we go. So they're going to do a little Q&A. Afterwards, we'll open it up to everyone else, and my colleague, Ari, will come around with a microphone and give that to anyone that wants to ask any questions. So Teen Museum Studies is a great program where the teens get to come in and they get to choose a local artist, local St. Louis artist, to have a solo art show upstairs in our Learning Engagement Gallery, which is right up here. This year, they chose glyneisha. They went through multiple candidates. We did a whole jurying process where they broke it down from a top 10 to top 5 to top 3. But the whole program is sort of ran by the students. I'm there as kind of a guidance. I kind of help like funnel questions, but overall, it really does come down to the students. And they do an amazing job of making the program happen and problem solving and troubleshooting and like making the show what it is. So thank you to the TMS students and all the other ones that were not here today. And a huge shout out to our funders as well that make the program possible. Without them, we wouldn't be able to have the amazing pizza and the drinks and the fun that we have in the classroom. So I really appreciate that. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to glyneisha Johnson.
Hi, everyone. Good to see y'all. All right. My name is glyneisha. I identify as a community caretaker, a multidisciplinary artist, an educator, a friend, a lover, a Scorpio. I thought this was a good tweet to share to ground us in our conversation today. And also to kind of just make sense out of my practice and the trajectory of the Artist Talks. Let's make sense out of this thing we call life together. So within my work as a multidisciplinary artist, that looks like collages, drawings, installation settings that are multidisciplinary and multisensory, photography, sound pieces. I'm really an artist in my adulthood, I would say, who's given myself the permission to kind of navigate through my studio practice through materials in the way that the work wants to, and also kind of this like call and response relationship with the materials and my studio processes too. You can see in this image, all of my work kind of centers around this notion of collages. I think they all look like collages, no matter what type of medium that I'm kind of navigating through. So with the black and white drawings where I'm using water-soluble graphite most of the time, I am breaking up those spaces through light, atmosphere, tone, and texture to kind of add that collage sentiment in that work. The collages, I'm using hand-painted papers, found and gathered materials, gifted old paintings from friends, cutting up those materials and making them into new arrangements. And the the installation settings, I would say, are kind of like a collage of experience where I am thinking about inserting this language of the Black interior into the gallery setting with this insertion of like bright colors, furniture, decorative artifacts, items from my family. And I would say collage is really a sentiment for me in describing Black history. It's like a metaphor for me. So the way that Black culture is kind of like torn apart and pieced back together with new generations and like constantly changed but influenced by the past, present, and future. I'm thinking about that as a metaphor in the way that I'm using materials and breaking up space, and really for me, collages in relationship to this sense of mending. So it's like collage equaling mending for me. That's the definition. My work is grounded in these sentiments of Black feminism, matrilineal languages, and really like the women who raised me. These are my grandmothers in the back, my mom and my dad. And so this is my family. And I would say my work has always been kind of this process of really being influenced by what I have, but also thinking about this kind of displaced history. I'm not a family who can like easily track like back 7 or 6 generations. So it's this process of thinking about these new histories that my family have made for themselves, but also this process of getting to the past while also thinking about the future for me. This is my great-grandmother, Ruby Pitts. This is my grandmother, Lily Ruth. And this is my mother, Daria McKenzie. And you can see these photographs are steeped in this language of the Black interior and surrounding by these kind of sentiments of home, creation, self-imagination through this process of curation. This is something that has always surrounded me and my family. And for me, these photographs are the direct examples of that. So when I was thinking about the artist talk today, one thing that I wanted to kind of be intentional about with knowing that I was going to be speaking to mostly young adults and students is think about my kind of place as an eternal student and my studio practice. And it's really like this sentiment that's been driving me. What does it mean to be a student in the studio, and what does that physically look like? So today I am going to be sharing like some old works from undergrad, some works when I first started my collage processes and first kind of found these languages for myself, and kind of talk to you what being a student looks like for me. Education is not about the filling of a vessel, but the lighting of a fire. This comes from Bell Hooks' Teaching to Transgress. In this book, she talks about this kind of relationship to education and learning, and relationship to the will of knowing, becoming the will of becoming. So what does it mean to not only be like influenced by language and learning, but also be like an activist with what you're learning? And for me, I think it's like a sentiment for me, because I'm a person who in my studio practices in my life, I'm always looking and seeing and kind of have this like eternal student relationship with life in the world. So in undergrad, what really got me into this language of collage for myself is this book, The Art of Romare Bearden, The Prevalence of Ritual. I had a class in undergrad called Ecstatic Drawing, where we had to pick an artist's book and reproduce every image in the book. I was in art school, clearly. So these are some images of Romeo Bearden that I took the time to sit with in this process. And I'm going to show you like what are some of those first collages from 2016, what did they look like for me, and thinking about these languages. So this is kind of like the first iterations of these languages. And so for me, what does it mean to be a student with the artists who I'm inspired by? For me, it looks like being in family and relationship to these artists. And it's this process of going through their works, reproducing them, cutting them up, making them into new arrangements. But it's for me kind of like, how can you continue this kind of familial language with like our ancestors or these artists that maybe we don't have access to, but have given us these tools and this reverence of their studio practice that I want to be in relationship to. This is another example. And this is when the works kind of started to change into their own things and me starting to implement like new languages, but really still thinking about what does it mean to look around me and be influenced by that through subject matter and media. And this is kind of a representation where being even more deeper into my processes of studying, what does it mean to like study your own stroke? And so for these images, kind of amplifying and zooming in on paint strokes and paint textures and making them turn into new works on their own. And so I'm gonna go through quickly some of these other images. This is Carrie James Marshall, a study from that work. Carrie Mae Weems, a study from that work. Boys in the Hood, what does it mean to be like a student of film and like a student of culture and really like a student of like these everyday images that surround us? A study of that work. Friday, a study of that work. Do the Right Thing, a study of that work. And these are kind of ongoing series and sentiments for me with these like front porch scenes, these stoop scenes. I'm from Dallas, I'm from the South. So I have this direct relationship to the Black interior extending to the front porch. How this space is a space of importance and identity for Black folks where we literally kind of wake up and live out these whole days setting scenarios on this space, but also thinking about like the curation of my family albums and photographs and like all of these stories and experiences being told on the front porch. And so this is when post-graduating, I really started to think about what does it mean to be like a student of my own space in a sense of like really this kind of interrogation of self-identity. I also like was probably like 23, 24. So I'm also like really in this place of like womanhood and figuring out what that means for myself through sexuality, through identity, through like everything that extends from that. And so I started to make these collages of my first apartment space. And these are some collages of those. In these works, I was also thinking about what does it mean to take away the figure from these Black interior spaces and think about these objects in the same way that I might think about portraiture. What does it mean for like a Black item to have this like whole identity within itself? What does it mean? Like, what is the identity of like the Sunday table that I grew up having meals at? And what does it mean to me to use these languages, work with these materials and objects, but also divorce the figure from those spaces? And so at the same time I'm making these collages, you'll see in my work, if you follow my practice, like this kind of repetition that's always happening, or these like meta languages between each other. So I'm also, while thinking about these spaces, thinking about this kind of study of memories, memories that are synonymous with Blackness or synonymous with art culture. And for me, that's like this process of sitting down in my mama's lap, getting my hair done, and recreating these sentiments. At this time in my practice, I had started to set up these photo shoots using figures in my own spaces. What does it mean to be a student of love? And what does it mean to like study my own family photographs? That's where I'm at right now, where I'm kind of in this process, unknowingly, that I've become like the archivist of my family. And so what does it mean for me to look through these materials while also thinking about like the language of collage, and materiality within my work? And these are examples of like how these sentiments have always followed me. These are images that my grandma took. So we've always had this kind of process of thinking about what does it mean to curate home from a sense of safety? How does the curation of home, how is it in relationship to self-identity? My grandma had this process of also documenting like private spaces that weren't always public, like her vanity area. And so what does it mean to like look at these objects that she chose for herself, and how do I compare that to the objects of today that I choose for myself, and the objects she's given me too that are still in these spaces? These are the installations, more examples where I'm kind of implementing these wallpaper furnitures, collages in the space, and thinking about what does it mean to be like a student of space? For me to be like responsible and aware and have like an allegiance to the spaces that I inhabit. And so for me, that was thinking about like, what does it mean for my friends to come into these spaces that maybe they haven't always felt safe at? When I had this show, I had friends speak to me and say like, hey, I don't feel comfortable coming to that gallery because I haven't felt welcome, but like I'm coming because I want to see your show. And eventually it got to a space where like it was no more about me selling this work, but about creating this space of experience and safety and healing for my family and my community to experience. And the work, I would say, has like extended from that sentiment and all of the materials and ways it experience. So I also wanted to implement these images of thinking about like my spiritual practice within the spaces. And also I would say like my work is like directly a relationship to what I'm going through, what I'm learning and myself. And I think I am a little bit stingy in that sense. But I think like it's a starting point for me. Like at the time that I made this show, I also had like developed this like really strong spiritual practice of learning and working with the land and introducing myself to these materials that were about healing, but also about these processes of ritual and lineage specific to the interior spaces that I was thinking about and inhabiting. And so this is kind of an example of me inserting those languages into the spaces too. All right. And here are some images of the shows upstairs. Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna start asking some questions about like glyneisha art practice and like her experiences with this show. speaking for myself here, but I'm really excited to be here, and we had a really great time working with glyneisha at Team Museum Studies, and it was a really great experience. So I'm just gonna start off with like, how has this show felt, and has it inspired any new projects?
Thank you for that question. The show has felt good. I am a person that like I be taking years to process things. So like I think I am still like articulating for myself like what this experience is in a lot of ways. But I would say like thinking about CAM in general before I even got to like what the show would look like. I had already been thinking about like what does it mean to like still think about the Black interior but not have to think about the space in such a direct way, and what does it mean to like think about this language in a more contemporary setting. And so I have a show up at the Tarbell Art Center right now at EIU, which I would say is kind of like what I may have wanted to do in a space spot camp, but like it ended up fitting with that show. But basically I kind of like created this grid space where I have like all of these objects of significance sitting on these like pedestals. And I also worked with the museum's collection and picked like 12 items from their collection and put them with 12 items from my personal collection. So I think like a space like this has got me thinking about the work and like what does it mean to expand the Black interior outside of the space itself, if that makes sense.
Okay, so my question is regarding to the title of your show here, and particularly the dreams part. So how do you use art as a space to dream?
I would say like the word that comes to me immediately when I get that question is imagination. I think my work has like this direct relationship to imagining, especially through the installation with like the items I'm choosing. And I'm even thinking about like the little angel figures upstairs. And so for me, like it is this kind of dreaming from like a direct sense of like these spaces are an opportunity for me to heal past trauma, and recreating spaces, thinking about like the childhood settings that I inhabited. But I think it's also this kind of space of like, I think it's also this space of like, I think it opens up for Black artists, like what are the possibilities and what our work can look like in a museum setting or a gallery setting, and like what does it mean to like activate these spaces from like a sense of personalness. Like I think that's dreaming too, because like I see it being done like a lot more now in a contemporary setting, but I think it's because of like artists like myself and like Micheline Thomas that like have kind of created this like more space to just be like, hey, let me just do it. And so yeah, I think that's like dreaming too. Like I just kind of go for it.
Okay. My question for you is, have you ever worked as or with a professional artist?
I would call myself a professional artist. I have not worked with a professional artist, maybe in like the sense you're thinking, like a famous professional artist. I have met Mark Bradford before, and that's like an experience that sticks with me. I went to the Booker T. Magnet High School for Performing Visual Arts in Dallas, and we had a direct relationship with the Dallas Museum of Art. And so like I was really privileged and blessed as a student where like when artists came, like they spoke to us and we could just like walk over to the museum and have conversations with them. So I've like spoke to famous artists, but like not work with them in a professional sense. But like I would love to. I'm all down for like a collaborative project.
You kind of touched on this a bit, but I kind of want to know more about when you first started exploring like these ideas about the Black interior. Like, was there a personal aspect that inspired it, or was it like did it come like kind of like a naturally through these during like undergrad, like all these explorations of like different artists and stuff?
Mm-hmm. So it was like an unconscious thing, I think. In 2017, I moved to Kansas City from Dallas, Texas. I went to a PWI, and I made work about returning to home. Because I was like uncomfortable and out of my space and out of my setting. And at the same time, my dad had just got out of prison, and I was 21 years old. My dad went to prison when I was 2. And so I was also like in this real place of like thinking about my childhood in a real way too. And so like I started to make these spaces that were like interiors, and I think the installations later on kind of came where when I was getting ready for a show in 2019, like I was making these collages, drawings, and at some point I was just like, I just gotta make it into a home. And so it just kind of came naturally, like I just listened to the work, I would say. Yeah.
Has that brought less like listening to yourself and listening with the work? Would you say that has brought like healing to you, and is that an important part of your own healing practice, you'd say?
Yes, for sure. I think it's also about like, for me, like, to be honest, a lot of the harm that I've experienced in my art career has been in institutional art settings. And so for me, like, that's also the healing component of like coming in these spaces and like making interiors and installations that are about cultivating this sense of care that is no longer about this kind of commercialization or the capitalism that like inherits these spaces. I think that's healing, like, and that's intention and manifestation setting too, in a bit.
My next question for you is, do you have a network of other artists, and how do they support you?
That's a good question. To be honest, I don't feel like I have a network of artists. And it is something that like I truly do want to cultivate for myself. And something that I feel like I've been intentional about when I've come into new communities. And I think like that question is a little layered to like, one thing that I speak about like from a spiritual sense is like, I know that I am like a chosen one. And so I know that I'm gonna navigate this world with a lot of isolation. And so that's like a sad thing, but I do think like I have a true interest in building community, but like my efforts have not always been met in return with that in truth. And so like, yes, I have like friends who, I feel like I can talk to about my work and like I love their work and there's a conversation, but I am still in the process of building that community for myself. And I think that looks like, for me, creating Strange Fruit Films, which is my community-based organization. And Strange Fruit Films, one of the programs we have is called Soulful Safe Space Sundays, where it's a critique space for like artists of color only. And so that's like, I think I'm in a space of like trying to build what I want to see, but also like trusting and no longer like chasing that community and just letting it come to me.
And I was kind of wondering if you find yourself like coming up with your ideas in like a specific space, if like in your studios where you find, or like in a place in your home you find the most like creative energy, or is that more, or is it more like day to day, like in your life you're finding these like ideas coming to you?
I would say it's more of the latter, the day to day. Very seldomly do I get an idea to be like, oh, like that was my light bulb if y'all didn't know. Where it's like, oh, I got this art idea and I know like what I want it to look like. Usually I'm kind of like, what's the starting point? And then I enter the work from there. And then I would say like the process of making itself really is like the experimentation and what leads to everything else. And so like in the collages, I would say like, I don't know what the collages are gonna look like when I finish them. It's really me like responding from the materials, putting papers up next to each other, putting patterns or colors and making decisions as I go.
Yeah, I think those are our questions for you. Thank you so much for answering them and taking the time today to speak with us. And I'm pretty sure we're gonna open it up for discussion and questions from everyone in the audience. So I think.
Thank you. Thank you, TMS.
Okay, so I'm going to be passing around the microphone. So if you have a question, raise your hand.
Hi. I'm curious what the key takeaways have been for you having worked with these students and executed this very thing.
For me, I would say just like being more hands-on and not being afraid of like the fear that comes with like having to actually do things to make decisions. I think something that like I was like really encouraged by the students earlier on is like when we were making decisions about the furniture and the artwork, them just like, well, let's go up there and like see what it looks like and moving things. And I think like as an artist, like sometimes we can get so in our head about like the ideas and the concepts, and like sometimes you just gotta do it to like see it through. And that's like, so I would say like the simplicity of like how they've handled, you know, and like attack the project in the curatorial aspect.
I actually have a question for the three of you, which is the sort of flip side to what you just asked, which was, what was it when you were going through the process and choosing that really made glyneisha's work stand out to you? How did you, what was it in that work that made you decide, oh, this is the person that we really want to work with?
So the process is all of us looked at every single artist and we did our own rating system of all of them. And then eventually we got to like a top 10, I'm pretty sure. And we discussed the 10 of them and narrowed it down until we reached an artist that we all had a deep like interest in. And for me, I think seeing the home like in that space being brought into all these different kind of like more institutional settings, and it felt so warm and welcoming, and knowing how like intimate of a space it is, glyneisha's work felt like the best fit for that, and that was kind of my thought process with all of it.
I really liked how glyneisha's work used collage with furniture. I've never really seen that before, so when I saw that when we were doing like the rating system, I found it really interesting, and I really liked how like all of the ideas and concepts really fit well together with both her style and like the art and the messages that go with it. I thought it was perfect.
Thank you for saying that, because I feel like sometimes I don't always feel like it fits together. And that's like the magic for me as an artist, because I have so many ideas and I'm like, how can it fit all together? Or does it just automatically fit all together? You know, and I don't have to think about it. So I'm glad you saw that.
Thank you for this conversation today. I think my question really is, I'm really driven by this being a teen museum studies program here at the St. Louis Arts Institution. And I'm wanting to know from you, as a teaching artist, as a community caretaker, what have you observed from working with teens, from local organizations, or in the capacity as a community caretaker that has really stuck with you or allowed you to reflect on yourself as a teen? Because I find myself to kind of go in when working with teens in certain capacities or even children.
That's a great question. First, I want to start by saying, like, I'm very appreciative of programs like this. And also shout out to like the Andrew Mellon Curatorial Fellowship Program as well. I told the teens about that. That's like an undergrad curatorial program. But like, I think these experiences, like specifically for like artists or teens who don't have this like knowledge or everyday exposure to like what working in a museum or like all the positions or like all of the possibilities of being in this space could be. Like, I think these programs really help us like enlighten those truths. And for me, it wasn't until like my undergrad where I was like, oh, like there's like 1,000 different positions in a museum, you know? And I think it's also like, you know, if you have like an administrative museum interest, it's an expansion of that, thinking about, you know, because I think like for young artists, we're thinking about like those main positions, the curator, you know, like the director, but there's also these other positions like the interpreters, the education folks, you know, the visitor service people that like you can really navigate through this communications where you can navigate in an art world space in. And so like I really value that, and I also value that because I think like for artists of color specifically, we just aren't aware of like all of the different ways that we can expand our art practice and sustain ourselves in a career sense from being a creative. And so like I value that. Working with teens, I would say I really just try to lean into like their energy. And I would say that's something that I try to do when teaching in general, you know, like checking in with the students, really gauging like what are their interests, what do you want from this? And I think that was like a conversation we had earlier on in our interview processes of like, I don't want to like come into this space and choose everything. Like I really want to be a collaborator and like have a sense of a cohort with y'all and treating them. So I would say like, I come into like all teaching positions and opportunities of like treating everyone as an equal, and like as much as they can learn from me, I can also learn from them.
I saw some questions over here, I think.
Hi, I thought it was really cool how you guys kind of extended the exhibition like outside of the four walls and activated the mezzanine a bit. I was just wondering if you could kind of talk about that process and like when visitors approach that space, like how are you wanting them to feel? Like what are you wanting us to experience in that space?
One thing walking into camp today, I saw someone just like sitting in the space, and that like really just warmed my heart. And so I think like that's, a simple activation of it. Like I really wanted this space to be used. And for like visitors of the museum, but also to like y'all who work here and like see this as like an extension of, like home in a sense. Like you spend a lot of time here. And so I think, I was also thinking about like what does it mean to like cultivate a space or care for the people who also like are inhabiting this space on the everyday. And yeah, so like folks who have given me like sentiments on this space so far have just been like, oh, it feels like my auntie's house. It feels like, my grandma's living room, or like I grew up with that saying kaftan, or so it's like that's what it's about for me. Like this sense of meeting each other, being able to like meet each other through our similarities, no matter like how different we are. Like that's what really created these like installation spaces that are meant to be sat with and inhabited and work with. That's what I wanted to like evoke. And I also like have intentions and dreams of, maybe doing like a book club in the space, or like another type of communal happening, like a collage workshop or something like that. And so I think that's also an extension of like, what does it mean to like come into, an art institutional setting and say like, hey, it can look different during this time, and it can feel good. And it doesn't have to feel like static and dark, and which I think like a lot of museum spaces do feel.
I was curious if, for your collage works, more so thinking about materials, if you source those from any kind of, like you were talking about, like familial archives, or just like where those materials come in, and if those are things you really think about in making the collages?
Yeah, so I would say it's layered. I say that it's like found, gifted, and gathered materials. So like for one collage I got called Cruising Together. Like one part of it is like all purple Crown Royal bags. And so like that was just Crown Royal bags that I was collecting. Cause Black folks be collecting Crown Royal bags, and there's also like some of my paintings or collages have like old Madeline Gallucci paintings in them, because like she was my studio mate for a few years. And so I think there's this like, and sometimes I'm like foraging materials and making inks, like specific local materials. So like when I lived in Kansas City, I collected goldenrod a lot and black walnuts and made inks. And so I'm like making hand painted papers from there too. So I think that like inserts this kind of like intention and specificity in the material. And so I would say like, and sometimes like I'm just going to the art store and buying some like nice fancy papers. So it's all of that.
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to make a comment. I think your work is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. My granddaughter is on the committee, and it was so much fun watching her during the process of the selection talk and be excited about all the different collages. She's always grabbing a newspaper from our house and cutting it up. So now I know where she got that from. But your work is just absolutely beautiful. And I don't know if you realize how important you are to young artists and mentoring them in the way that you do, just by accepting them and their ideas and collaborating together. I just wanted to tell you I think that's awesome and that your work is beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm wondering, like, functionality of the vanity inside the room. Do you want people to sit on the chair, or like, a lot of spaces it's meant to not touch. And what I love about this work, and you brought up Micheline Thomas's work in that, that conversation space, like you're meant to sit on it, you're meant to walk across the rug and those things. So can you talk a little bit more about the vanity space inside?
The vanity space is not meant to be sat with. And I will say, like, the decision making when it comes to like how interactive the installations get is really usually in conversation with like the space I'm working with, and most honestly, insurance. So while the vanity space, like, I really did want it to be interactive with, and before now, all of my installations have like had access to do so. I needed like a little bit more protection in this space.
I had two questions. The first is, when you look at photographs of your family, and it's kind of like, when I like choose photographs to work from as an artist from my family, I think of them as like artifacts, and certain ones will like call to me, and I'm wondering like how you decide which photographs, because looking at the presentation, I felt like there was such significance in the photos that you showed. So I wondered how you choose photograph.
I do think I agree with that. Like, certain ones call to me for sure for different reasons. Some of those reasons may be like artistic decisions that are more like simplistic, whether it be like composition. But sometimes it's like right now I'm working on a collage of my great grandpa who I never met before. And so I think like sometimes it's like sentiments like that too, like ancestors calling that like you know these like stories and experiences about, but haven't got the chance to like meet them. And yeah, so like it's kind of like a bit of like living vicariously through, like my ancestors, and also like the green piece upstairs, that's like my great grandma from like the 60s. So like I heard she was a Rolling Stone, but never got a chance to like see her in that element or era. So I think it's also just like really being interested in like the identity and humanity of the people in my family through like their own spaces, but also through like their fashion and their poses, and just like the energy that they're embodying in the images too. Like, I think that's so much of like a conversation with them too.
Cool. That kind of goes into my second question, which was, why is she called Bad Ruby?
Bad Ruby.
Oh, yeah.
With 2 D's. Because I just felt like that's what that photo was giving. Like my great grandma Ruby, she grew up in Gary, Indiana. And so like, she does have like this kind of rough around the edges likeness to her. And she didn't live with us until maybe like her 80s. She moved to Texas, and I got a chance to like experience her and live with her and find out about who she was. But, and even just like in her, who I knew, like she was always like super spicy, like you know, was like a my way or no way type of person. And honestly, just like her holding that cigarette in that photo, I was like, yeah, this giving bad Ruby. Thank you all.